Um, that was a great talk. And it's funny because I'm covering some somewhat similar material, and there's actually not a whole lot of overlap. Partly that's because it's such a new and kind of exciting and evolving field, so it's hard to kind of nail it down with one go. As I'm sure you're aware, you're going through all this stuff. There's so much stuff to say. But what I'm going to try to do is, I've done a presentation on this before that was really interactive and introductory. And so I'm very much open. If there's some kind of field that you want to talk about, we'll do that. We'll have some time. But what I want to do, first of all, is kind of follow one chain of reasoning, and hopefully it seems like it makes sense. But I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation in the abstract and what we can know about innovation. I'm going to talk about the innovation of Bitcoin, what is unique about it, and how the space that created relates to what we know about innovation. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see Python's place in kind of the broader system of internet sites. And I'm reading off that. And so I'm going to try to anticipate a little bit about where I see Python projects going in the cryptocurrency space. There's only 2 slides, so I'll get at the end to the interesting stuff, so that's cool. I threw out my slides 2 days ago, so because you reformat things. I think this is better. Okay, so often innovation, the concept of innovation is a little bit uncomfortable for people who are really analytical, because there's so much we can do where we know we can get to the destination, we can create something cool and we know it, and innovation seems kind of fuzzy and you can never really reliably anticipate it, and so it seems kind of uncomfortable for people when they're really analytical. But the thing is, it's the source of value for in fact, the whole technology industry, really. The whole point of what we do when we go to work is to create new things. So having some understanding of innovation is actually critically important, because that's how we really build value. And there are some things that we know about it. Innovation has actually been the subject of a great deal of research. Up until maybe 20 years ago, a lot of that was focused on primary school education type of thing. But in the last, more recently, there's been a lot of research in the business world about innovation and kind of the parameters around it. And some organizations are clearly good at innovating and repeating that. So there's clearly something that you can know about it, and you can continually innovate. Because we can see people actually doing that. And I'm going to focus, because I'm only going to spend a short time on it, I'm going to focus on 3 essential points. It's very hard to predict who will come up with a particular innovation. If we were to say that somebody in this room is going to invent something in the next year, it's very hard to decide who is likely to. But within a group, you can analyze that to understand whether or not the group is more likely to innovate or less. One of the key elements of that understanding is how well the group listens to each other, really. And that's harder, that's not as easy as it sounds. So listening is the first key. The next key is diversity. Diversity mostly in experience. So you have people with different backgrounds, with different professions, and if you mix people with different professional perspectives and you talk about a problem, you're more likely to come up with an innovative solution than if you're mixing a whole bunch of people who really have a very similar background. You'll probably get actually a very good representation of their industry, but it won't be very innovative. And the key difference between groups that are very innovative and groups that struggle with innovation is actually safety, social safety. This is actually, you know what, I have a quote from the chief innovation evangelist at Google, who comes up with a title like that, but he does know the material, and he strongly believes that this is the key factor. And there's actually now some research. The research is really funny. They have repeated experiments so that they can get something real. They pit kindergarten students against people who are in graduate school on simple tasks, and under certain conditions, the kindergarten students are better because the kindergarten students work with each other immediately, and they just start working on getting this spaghetti to hold up a marshmallow or whatever it is. And the MBA students all sound very smart, and they are smart. Individually, they're very smart. But when you look at the tapes and you look at the conversation they're having, a lot of what they're actually doing is sort of social positioning, you know. I'm really smart. I'm really smart. And that's not actually productive in terms of solving the problem. And so when they look at it, the kindergarten students spent the whole time trying to solve the problem, and the graduate students spent 2 minutes and fail. And so it's really interesting perspective. But at any rate, the key learning is that social safety and the willingness to work together and to be wrong and to not ostracize somebody when they're wrong makes a huge difference in terms of a group being productively innovative. And when you think about all of those things, one of the kind of interesting takeaways is it's very easy to undermine a creative process unintentionally. Really, there's no bad guys. It's very easy to kind of react to something in a way that kind of kills the environment, right? And you don't mean it, generally, or never really. So organizations that are really mindful, and this is important because you have to be actually mindful to create an environment to innovate. But organizations do it. Pixar comes out with, bizarrely creative film every year, and if you look back 10 years ago before they owned Pixar, Disney really struggled with that. They really struggled to be innovative. IDEO is another organization that innovation, new ideas, that's what they put through their assembly line. That drops off the assembly line every week, as new ideas. So there are organizations that really repeatedly do this. And another actual area that picks up on this opportunity very well is open source projects, because anybody can submit, some more so than others. You have to work on building a community, and we know that, but open source projects do have an opportunity to bring in ideas from many people. So that actually is quite powerful, and it's, again, important to be mindful of that. So now, I'm going to talk about Bitcoin. And in particular, I want to talk about what was, this is a bit of a digression because I want to go over actually a little bit of what we've talked about, the innovation of Bitcoin itself. It's a new technology and people really haven't solidified their understanding of it, so I'm going to go through a few things. But what I'm really want to focus on is what the actual innovation was, because it brings together so many kind of great but somewhat unfamiliar ideas, so it's very easy to feel satisfied that you understand it, accurately satisfied that you understand it, before you really get what was the nub of what was new. When you look at how Bitcoin works, the chain of blocks is really important. But if you think about it, a linked list, which is a chain of data structures, is over half a century old. So that's not the innovation. Clever, not the innovation. Digital signature schemes, really neat technology. It's really neat to get into how they work, but that's not the innovation. How many people here are familiar with Git, the code repository? Everybody. How many people are familiar with the way Git uses hash pointers? couple people? Okay, but it's enough to demonstrate that hash pointers clearly are not an innovation of Bitcoin. Again, actually, one of these ideas that when you get into it, it's a really neat idea. It's fun to learn about these things just because, that's a cool idea. Okay, so I'm going to step back, and the other thing that is closely related but not exactly the same as distributed systems. And distributed databases in particular have been making crazy advances even just in the last 5 years. It's now actually quite easy to do bizarre amounts of calculation, and our privacy is toast. But that's another talk. At any rate, is that on again? Super. Sorry. So, distributed systems. Distributed systems, again, are actually related, and the development of the technology, there's some interesting overlaps. When you look at how Apache Spark is put together, it's actually really impressive. One of the legacies of that was Napster, and when Napster went away, we created BitTorrent, and the thing that did, there was one critical difference, and that was that Napster was taken down because they got sued, and BitTorrent made it so that every part of the system was distributed, and that it wasn't actually a huge thing because really most of the work was done with Napster, but that little thing made it hard to stop. And so that's one step. It also becomes really useful in a data center when you're putting up Apache Spark that everything is redundant, so you can't go down. Well, you can, but the reliability is crazy high when you make everything redundant. And when you have it in Apache Spark and it's all packaged, you just put it in, and it becomes relatively simple next to what it used to be to put up a data center. And so this actually is not the same as Bitcoin, but there's overlap in that one of the things that Bitcoin tries to accomplish is a radically distributed system so that every node has full participation in the network. And you can't just focus on one node or one organization to bring it down. Some cryptocurrencies violate that, right? So that's why I'm kind of pointing this out, even if you choose something that's not as radically distributed, it's a good idea to be mindful of the difference. But we still haven't gotten to what the actual innovation is. And I'm going to say that is, Vitalik Buterin called it crypto economics. And what it is you have a broadly distributed system, so everybody shares the software. You have a proof of work mechanism actually that was invented with the idea of being used for email. So again, that's one, even though it's associated with this, it's one of these older technologies. You have a proof of work system that is used to distribute rewards so that everybody gets shares in the idea is that everybody shares in the rewards, the dividends from the project. And what this does is that people get rewarded for helping to secure the network, and because the network is secure, you've got this self-reinforcing cycle. And so that makes the system itself quite resilient. And so there's two sides to that I'm going to consider. The technical side, which you might call a Byzantine general's problem solution, is where you have a distributed system, but if you are storing something that is very valuable, then you should expect that many people will be motivated to try to steal it or to try to undermine the network or whatever other shenanigans they're going to come up with. And so, and there are some solutions to the Byzantine general's problem because it's one of these things that's been out there for a long time. A lot of smart people have been working on it. It's quite common for a solution to experience north of 90% performance degradation under attack, which is, so you still survive the attack, you still survive, but even when you found solutions, it's a tough problem. And that is a factor in when you hear people talk about, some of the criticisms of Bitcoin. That is sort of a factor, that Bitcoin has actually been under attack from a lot of different ways for its whole existence. The other side of that is the social side. And again, Bitcoin as a store of something worth stealing, it comes under social attacks as well. There's been an innumerable number of scams that are positioned directly adjacent to Bitcoin. Has anybody heard of BitConnect? So you have this thing that was broadly identified. I think it's fair to say it was broadly identified as a Ponzi scheme a long time ago, like well before they collapsed. And so it was actually a bit surreal that you have something that basically many people know is a Ponzi scheme. It collapsed about a month ago, but people were still buying it, and it was one of the top cryptocurrencies for a while. And one of the things I found frustrating is that when people like Jamie Dimon or Paul Krugman, even if I'm going to try to piss off everybody, when they look at Bitcoin and say it's a Ponzi scheme, they're looking right past an actual Ponzi scheme to criticize Bitcoin, which is interesting because it suggests that helping people understand isn't really what they're trying to do. So that's the social side, and again on that social side, because you have a lot of people who are involved in getting some remuneration, they're kind of motivated to work it out, and they have been so far. So back to this innovation theme. I'm going to talk about three factors that kind of connect with what we were saying about innovation. First is that the projects that are important are open source projects. So you can look at the source code, and it would be unwise to really take seriously any project that was not open source, because it takes a leap of faith that's probably not reasonable. The other factor is permissionless innovation. And the best analogy for that is the internet. When we started networking computers, there was two visions for where we would find the most value for that technology. And a lot of times people thought that the greatest value would come from being able to share the printer down the hall or email your coworkers. So the intranet was something that people could really see would have real value. And the connections between organizations looked a little bit more dubious. It was, smut and whatever. But one key differentiator was the internet was open to permissionless innovation. Anybody could post a website. Anybody could participate in that network. And when they did, they increased the value of the network, because now you would say, well, the internet's great because I can go and buy a book on it or whatever. I get a better price on a computer or look up information on Wikipedia. But each time somebody came up with some innovation that related to the internet itself became more valuable. And so that kind of open use case is important to accessing a broad source of innovation. Many people can benefit from this. It makes sense for many people to participate in it and drive it forward. And of course, it doesn't hurt that many people are making money off of it, because that actually makes it sustainable. I would love to work for a charity. I don't, but I do need to pay rent, and by pulling in money in that helps. And also, that money aspect, again, is something that makes people uncomfortable for good reason, because there are so many scams. It's kind of an uncomfortable thing. But this is a technology that is money that is native to the internet. So in order to make a transaction, you do not have to give somebody your name and credit card number and persistent information that will be dangerous to you when Equifax releases it. Not that they would. So when you do a Bitcoin transaction, you're not exposed in the same way. The other thing is that the dollar amounts that it makes sense to transact in, the range is much bigger. For a credit card, you're probably not going to make a transaction under $10 or something like that, because basically the cost of the transaction is going to exceed the value. And then over 1,000, you're probably just not going to do it. But with a more secure system, that range becomes much broader. And that likely implies that systems that access this in the future are likely going to, it's going to be easier to monetize. It's going to be easier to make a application that is self-sufficient, that is just because you have a better range of what you can do in terms of paying for it. So that is Bitcoin and how it kind of relates to what we know about innovation. And that's important because that drives the certainty that people have around the value. Now, I have no idea what the value really is, of course, but I do have a high confidence that there is a lot of value there. How much is, I'm not going to get into. But the next thing is we're going to talk about Python and where I expect that to fit. Now, if you think about where Python fits in the scheme of things, Python is not PostgreSQL. It's not the Apache web server. It's not the internet. It is sort of the best applications on the internet, I would say. So actually, I'm going to step back a little bit, sorry, and talk about the positioning of Python that philosophically. How many people are familiar with Grace Hooper, famous Pythonist? I'm a little disappointed that there's only a couple of people. So Grace Hooper was famous for creating the COBOL programming language. And she drove a lot of standards projects so that when you worked on one computer system, you could transfer to the next computer system. You didn't need to relearn everything. You didn't need to relearn the instruction set and that kind of stuff. And she actually also spent a lot of time in her career in education. And all of those three things make the technology more familiar and make it easier to see through the technology so that you don't think about the instruction set of the processor you're working on. You can spend more of your mental energy thinking about your own problem domain. And so I'm going to argue that despite the fact that COBOL is not Python, Python stands firmly in that tradition where you write once and run anywhere, except we're more inclined to give credit where it's due. So that's Grace Hooper. And because Python, and it's not an accident, it's not something that just happens. There's a great deal of energy that goes into the standard libraries in terms of each function that is built is designed carefully so that when you're using it, it's as intuitive as it can be, right? So that means that you don't have to think about it as much. And again, you can focus on your own problem. Because of that, Python creates great solutions across a really broad range of applications. And that's what I would expect with this. The Bitcoin Lightning Network was in testing last year, and it's only now that it's really getting up and going. So small transactions are a lot more viable today than they were even really 6 months ago. So this is the time. This is the time that we will start seeing development on a broader range of applications for cryptocurrencies, in my humble opinion. And so I'm gonna stop there and see if you have any questions. We talked a little bit about innovation. I hope that you can see the connection why, because it really is a source of the value that the cryptocurrency space really is likely to access innovation very well. And I think going forward, Python will play a lot bigger role than it has. What we have been doing is building infrastructure, and what we are about to start doing is building applications, and I think that's where Python is really going to shine. Any ideas, arguments? What did you think? We have the other expert here. Yes? Okay, so my Twitter handle. You can PM me and ask me questions. Okay, mastering Bitcoin. I have to give Andreas credit because this is one of the first books that came out. It did a good job of explaining the technicals. My favorite book on the technical side is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency technology, because that really goes through the core technologies. It's written, I think it's produced by Princeton Press. A bunch of professors worked on it, and it's brilliant. The age of cryptocurrency and how many got free is a little bit more on the social side. So it kind of anticipates how that system will play out. And okay, The Mathematics of Secrets is an awesome book. It's not actually directly related. It talks about cryptography, but it does it in very simple language, very accessible. It talks about how people have tried to keep secrets over the last 1,000 years. So it talks about different schemes like the Caesar cipher, which is almost silly now, but they really have contributed to how we do encryption today. The big advances came in the 40s with, okay, I'm talking too much about this. but it's neat because by looking at really old technologies, it's easy to understand how they work. And then when you kind of rolls it up into the digital age, you feel like you kind of understand on a more intuitive level what's going on when things are encrypted. So I feel that's an awesome book. New Lombard Street, again, is off the main path. It really just talks about the financial system and how it is built and what money is. So it doesn't talk as much about the conversations that you've probably already had about money. It talks about what money is, and so it's a little bit more salient to this space. And I'm not sure if any of those directly related. Whoa, did they? Crypto assets is a new one. It's in a slightly different font because I just added it. This came out this year. And this talks a little bit about different assets that are being made available, ICOs and things. It has a pretty balanced view. It's funny because, like I said, I really focused on Bitcoin and just kind of opened up the space because you have to do your own homework. When you read white papers, it's really fun. Actually, some white papers are awesome because often a white paper will be used to introduce a new idea, some new great idea for how to make something work. So a lot of white papers are awesome. A lot of white papers are sort of trying to sell some ICO, and they don't. And my big litmus test there is if it's not really adding some interesting idea, or if it's yet another ICO, I'm not interested. But if it's adding some really strong functionality like the privacy coins, right? That is a legitimate improvement. And so a project that has a strong privacy functionality, you can say that's much better. And the other actual thing that was mentioned is smart contracts. And the Ethereum contract language that it started with was a little bit clunky, and the founders thought it should be more Pythonic. So they created a new scripting language for the smart contracts that is very similar to Python by design, because Python's awesome. And it's called Viper. Oh, okay. No, I was thinking about Viper only because Vitalik Buterin was describing it some. Okay. And so that's one option. The Hyperledger project is an open source project that kind of looks at related projects. So they also work with Python, and they can be interesting. PyCoin is another one. And of my 3 examples, we didn't overlap at all, which is like shocking. Solidity is the main. Yeah.
Thank you. I've checked out their ecosystem, and it's definitely not friendly for building contracts. The thing that what people don't understand about Ethereum, it doesn't have the best technology, but it has the best experience for developers. Like, for someone who wants to learn about smart contracts and be able to deploy a smart contract, it's just easier to use Ethereum now. That might not be true in 6 months. So if you are thinking about coming up with your own smart contract platform, think about developer experience. It should be easy for developers to be able to pick it up. And when it's easy for developers to pick it up, then you have other packages that build on top of it. And I have not seen any other platform, well, I haven't seen many platforms where you have different packages building on top of a smart contract language as Solidity.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Yes. Are you thinking of the DAO? Yeah. Okay, I think that sounds like a longer conversation and our time's up. So we'll have to continue that somewhere else. But it's actually, I think, you're hitting on a really important issue, and that's something everybody has to be mindful of. So it's a great point. So thank you all for being attentive, and we'll wrap it up here. Thank you.